The rationale for the bisecting of urban areas through interstates was provided when these interstate policies were initially devised in the 1950s. They looked at which areas they could feasibly destroy. Where could they dig up to provide the roadways, the on-ramps, the off-ramps, and the like that, from the planner's perspective, would cause the least overall harm to the city? And the way in which those questions were answered were consistently in a way that sought out neighborhoods populated by people of African descent, communities of color, to basically conclude that these were the paths of least resistance.
It was certainly designed for improvement and opening a way to move people from one side to the other.
We see interstate construction that is facilitated in a way specifically to privilege certain populations and further marginalize others.
It really was the advent of a real division, almost like the line of demarcation.
We had a lot of really poor housing in neighborhoods that were poorly served by public infrastructure and that needed help. Dirt streets, very narrow streets, substandard water. There were places where the water line was not sufficient to provide the necessary supply of water to fight fire.
I remember our doctor's offices were in buildings downtown, Squire Lanier, an attorney, and Patterson Avenue. I mean, if there's any such thing, I think that might have been our Wall Street.
And I remember thinking at the time that the areas where we were purchasing and moving people and businesses even out of sort of functioned as a pretty good neighborhood, and there were corner stores that served the people in the neighborhood. And I thought, there must be a better way, but I couldn't think of a better way. My mother had a lady who cleaned for her, and sometimes my mother would drive her home and I would ride with her to where she lived. And it was just on the other side of the railroad from downtown where she lived. I don't remember going much farther than that in those days.
I don't think it's any accident or mere coincidence that the very populations that are restricted from access to the voting booth are the very same populations that are then negatively impacted by the policies that are created by people that don't represent those populations.
It's a feeling almost of not hopelessness, but of not having the power to do anything to change what is happening.
But it just bothers me that sometimes we don't have people to stand up and to be able to speak for us and stand on our behalf and say that sometimes it's just not good to break up communities and displace people.
I really was angry. my question continued to be, what happened? A kind of progress going in one direction that created what I call a spiral of being entrapped into a way of life that will not allow you even the light of the sun to look toward getting out of. Legacy matters. God is not making any more dirt. The dirt is there. If you destroy everything there, then you have nothing to ignite the minds and the imagination and the spirit to develop what's there, just as you've developed in other places. Winston-Salem is thriving everywhere except in the area that has been sort of isolated and separated.
This is going to change the whole equation.
Well, at first I felt angry, but I just thought to myself, I am not going to have all that anger built up inside of me for having to lose my property. I worked all my life, paid for my house. To me, it was the American dream to own property. And now my dream is gone. The thing that bothers me is I don't know where I'm going. I don't have no idea. I won't come by to look. If I come by, I'll keep looking straight ahead. I won't even look over this way. Because I feel like now it's not mine. I won't be back to look at it, see them tear it down. My grandmother was caught up in that. She lost her house on the count of 421. And then my cousins that lived across over there where the stadium, that was a fluent black neighborhood, my cousins and my mother were born in that area. It was really hard on them because after all, they had spent all their money into buying their houses there. And then after the interstate came through and took their houses, then a lot of them had to move into the senior places. I think highways have a lot to do with breaking up communities. And the change has really damaged the black neighborhood a lot in 52 years. We are not together, relative, helping each other like we used to. So I think we suffer sometimes from that. People that's not as fortunate as other ones sometimes are left behind.
I mean, I do think we're at a time where we can't have these conversations, that we've had enough go on in our political climate as well as in our ecological and our social and cultural climate. I'm calling it climate because of their dynamic. And these questions, that we can begin to sort of see how we've isolated ourselves in the landscape to a certain degree. And this is across the board, whether it's race and class, whether it's gender, you see these discussions flaring up and people taking sides. And on one hand, I think that's a very healthy thing, that at least we can have these conversations. And people can see which side of the fence that they're on. And for me in the landscape, what's really fantastic is it's one of the few places, physical places, that we have to share. And that's where you can begin to bring back some of these memories and have these conversations. And these conversations about an African American who owned land, where the freeway is, 11 acres here. You could talk about I-40 and how freeways have been used planning-wise to segregate communities. And we know that. Least resistance, that's where, we go in. We also know ecologically, that the more biomass we have in our cities, the healthier we can be. We also know that the more active we can be. So trails and things like walkways, strollways, trees, infrastructure, all of these things can begin to sort of create a context for discussions on subjects that people used to not want to have. And today, hopefully, you can have those discussions.